everyone. Welcome to the MGH Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit Community Forum Friday session, Caregiver Roundtable, Shared Wisdom from Experienced Caregivers. I'm so happy to welcome you all today, and we're so lucky to be joined by three experienced caregivers. I'd love to introduce each of them to you before I welcome them on today. And I should start by introducing myself. My name is Katie Brandt. I'm the Director of Caregiver Support Services and Public Relations for the MGH Frontal Temporal Disorders Unit. I'll be joined today by three experienced caregivers so that we can share lessons learned, tips and tricks, maybe some coping strategies, and some memories around a caregiving experience. And so our first caregiver today that I'd like to introduce is Chuck Anastasia. Chuck Anastasia was a caregiver to his wife VJ for 7 years. Chuck is now an Association for Frontal Temporal Degeneration, that's AFTD, support group leader, and he also leads an Alzheimer's support group. Chuck is from Rhode Island. Welcome, Chuck. Next, we have Chris Boyer. Chris was a caregiver for her husband, Frank, for 10 years, and Frank was living with primary progressive aphasia. Welcome, Chris. And third, we have Carol Goldman. Carol was a caregiver for 12 years for her husband, Bruce, who was living with behavioral variant FTD. Welcome, Carol. And as our caregivers are joining us today for our roundtable discussion, I would like to welcome everyone who's participating in the live webinar today to put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We appreciate your comments and your live questions, and we know that the caregiver experience for everyone is unique, but we also know that hearing shared stories of the authentic voice, the lived experience, can sometimes give you a tip or an idea or a new perspective that you hadn't thought of before. So that's what we're hoping to share with all of you today. So Carol, I would love to welcome you to this morning's webinar.
Hi, Katie. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you. Carol and Chris and Chuck and I are all good friends. We're more than colleagues and shared caregivers. But Carol, I would love it if, as we started this morning, you might share something about your husband, Bruce.
I'd be happy to. Bruce and I met on Super Bowl Sunday in 1980. And I was not a football fan, but I became one. And we were married for 38 years. Bruce was a psychologist. He was a great partner and a wonderful father to our son. And he started to show personality changes when he was about 58. So he was diagnosed when he was 67. It was a very slow progression. So, and he died 2 years ago.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that as we begin today, it's so important to have each of you share a little something about your loved one, because as Chris just shared, Carol just shared, what I love hearing is the rich personhood of all of our patients, that there's so much more than just the diagnosis and the symptoms and the care experiences. So I really appreciate that, Carol. Thank you. Chris, would you love to share something about Frank with us this morning?
I love to talk about him. Frank and I were college sweethearts. We were together close to 50 years and had a wonderful relationship. We were both self-employed for a number of years, so we spent our working time and our non-working time in the same space anyway. And Frank was a CPA. He had a private practice with maybe 300 clients. And he was diagnosed with PPA at the age of 60. And he was able to, interestingly, able to continue to do his accounting work for a while because the numbers didn't bother him. But when I started realizing he was having true difficulties was when he started asking me to, could you explain to my client, Katie, this point, because he couldn't find the words to describe things anymore. But the numbers were perfect for a long time. He stayed home with me for, Frank passed away in January of this year, right before COVID, which I consider a blessing. It was imminent anyway, and I really would not have wanted to have to live with caregivers coming and going, except that I had the experience in my home, and I hope some of you out there are having as good an experience with your caregivers as I had, including hospice and paid caregivers. And I've run the gamut anyway, from having him home 2 years in assisted living and then back home with me for a hospice to die. So long journey.
Chris, I appreciate that so much, because we would not want to say that part of this was wonderful, but something that is wonderful is how you have shared with me in the past how you and Frank benefited from those supportive services, and I hope you'll tell us more about them today.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love hearing about Frank and his command of math, because I don't have that command, so
Neither.
I really envy people who have it. Chuck, welcome.
Thank you.
I would love it if you would share something about VJ with us today.
Sure. And listening to Carol and Chris, we have actually quite a few things in common, because VJ and I, we met at University of Rhode Island and we got married right after college. She was also a numbers person, and she had degrees in engineering and in math, and she worked as an industrial engineer for 5 years before we had children. We have 3 adult children now and 2 grandchildren. Our children are now in their early to mid 30s, and grandchildren are 2 boys, are 4, almost 4, and 2. And so VJ was a very intelligent, bright, and active person. She was very organized and detail-oriented, and so it was in around 2012 when things started to change. And initially it was just being disorganized and losing her wallet, losing her insurance card, losing her keys. And, you know, initially I didn't think too much of it, but then she called me twice within the span of like 10 days and said she couldn't remember where she parked her car. And so in one situation, I actually went, and because it was in downtown Providence, I went and I helped her find her car. The second time it was in a shopping center parking lot, and I just told her, walk around and press the little button on your key fob and you'll hear the car will beep and you'll find it. But after that, you know, those were very uncharacteristic of her being so detail oriented. So we started, you know, looking for answers of what was going on, and that led to over about a year, a diagnosis of frontal temporal degeneration. And you know, it was, as Katie mentioned earlier, a 7-year journey. She stayed mostly at home with me through that time. At the very end, I just got to the point, and we, you know, she used adult day programs. We had home companions that came in. You know, I was able to continue working. Toward the end, I switched from full-time to part-time to focus more attention on her care. And as we got near the end of the journey, the last 3 months, she ended up in a skilled nursing facility in Providence at Steerhouse. And, so she passed away in February of 2019.
Thank you for sharing that, Chuck. I love hearing about people's personalities, because sometimes throughout the course of the disease, they're not able to share their old personality with us in the same way. And so I welcomed each of you to this Caregiver Roundtable because you have been through the entire journey with your loved one, from symptoms to diagnosis to care and to passing. And what we hope to share through this roundtable experience is not that everything that you shared today will be what everyone might experience at home, but that maybe they might hear something in your story to say, you know what, I hadn't thought of that before. And I think it's that shared wisdom. And sometimes caregivers, Carol, I think I remember you sharing at a Newton Wellesley support group when we used to be able to meet in person. I remember one time you remarking, oh, I wish I knew this before. And I'm wondering if anything comes to mind that you think about that you had to navigate in the early days that either was helpful to you or you sort of think is useful for a caregiver to think about early on.
Thank you, Katie. I think there's so many things that we learned from this crazy experience. I could talk for a long time about what I wish I knew in the beginning. But I think that at the time of diagnosis, I was so flooded with fear about not knowing what was going to happen. And that my response to that was to try to control everything. And some of that was good because I had tasks to focus on, legal tasks, financial tasks, making preparations. But one of the lessons that I had to learn, and that was very hard for me to learn, was that I had no control really over the outcome. And the more I tried to control things, the more anxious and sick I got, the more depressed I got. So part of the lesson for me on this, really long journey was that unpredictability was our companion from the beginning to the end. And that once I could control the sort of practical things, I needed to learn how to let go of control of the outcome. And that taught me a lesson that's still useful for me. Focus on what I can control and then let go of the rest. And then as I did that, I was more able to be in the moment with my husband. I was more able to do the emotional work of staying connected and present with him. So that was a big lesson for me.
I mean, I think you're bringing up so many important points, but especially just touching on that self-care piece right away. So how, your loved one is the one who has the diagnosis, who has the symptoms, who has the disease, but it does affect the care partner as well. And did Bruce share the concerns that you did?
Bruce never knew that he was ill. And I remember one time I sort of lost my cool, and he looked at me and he said, what's happened to you? You're different. You're not the same woman I married. I said, well, honey, I'm under a lot of stress right now. And he looked at me with complete innocence. He goes, why? What's stressful in your life? So, I mean, yeah, that was stressful in my life, right? That he had no, I mean, it was a blessing for him. He had no awareness. But
and I shared a laugh with you there, Carol, and we have a connection. And for many people who attend support group, they may know that we do have these reactions, right? Sometimes the lived experience helps you see humor in things that prior to walking that journey, you might not think that that's very funny. It's not funny that your partner of 30-something years is not able to recognize this shift in your relationship or your life. But sometimes walking the journey, we find humor and relief in areas where we didn't before.
Well, I think it's our humor that makes us human. And even in the darkest moments, there's humor.
There's humor.
Thank God. Right.
Chris, I know that you had a long journey with Frank, and you guys were partners through the end. And can you think of some of those early days and maybe some of the decisions or things that you did that sort of helped you navigate the beginning?
Like Carol said, there's so many things that come to mind, but navigating the beginning, I had to take care of, like Carol said, the practical things, of course. I had to sell Frank's CPA practice, find a buyer and sell his practice. I had to sell our home because we had 2 homes at the time, and things like that. And then I had to, which I can't say enough of, while Frank was still able to understand a little bit, we made all the decisions on wills, trusts, financial future, healthcare, well, healthcare proxy and that kind of thing, while he was still able. And in fact, Frank was able to say out loud that he wanted to donate his brain to MGH when he was gone. And that actually came to fruition, which I'm so grateful for. It was an amazing day. And Katie even called me when they brought Frank into the operating room. But so I think once the practical stuff was taken out of the way, the early things for me were, I guess now that I'm looking back, that picture that you showed of us in the beginning was one of the last times I was able to travel with him, because the behavior becomes, he didn't have behavioral variant, but he had PPA, which was total incomprehension. He did not understand an airport or a car, or he'd laugh. And so when I realized that we were getting to the point where those things weren't going to happen anymore much longer, I said, just do them. And I did. I put him in a car with, Ben just took a nap, our big dog, and drove us down to Florida, where we spent 2 months of the winter. And I was able to walk him around outside. Occasionally he walked outside in his underwear, but my neighbors were very forgiving. At least we were in warm weather. And I tried to do things like that with him. I still took him to good friends' houses, and he was welcome at their homes. And he couldn't participate in the way my Frank always did, but he could participate by smiling. And it was very quiet because he didn't talk. He became nonverbal pretty quickly, and he would just smile and be very agreeable. And when it was time to go, I could tell when it was time to go. So I guess what I'm saying is I tried in the early stages to do everything as normal as possible for as long as possible. And I'll give you one example that may be helpful. On the drive down to Florida, it was just Frank and me and the dog. And as we were driving, and I had the whole thing planned to stop different places so I don't only drive 6 hours a day and stuff like that. And he was very quiet, and as long as I was playing the 50s and 60s channel on Sirius XM. So we'd stop, and then one of the days, I took 3 days to drive. One of the days we stopped to make a bathroom break, and I realized it is hot outside. I've got a dog and all of our belongings in the car, and a man who can't navigate a men's room by himself. What do I do? and I had to trust strangers, which was really interesting. But I did, a man who was very, very kind to me. I just took my chances and said, I will stand up. I can't leave the car, but I can stand right outside of the door here. Do you mind walking in with him? He's very friendly, but he won't understand you. And the man did. And I heard the man laughing with him. And, Frank, he was turning on the air to do his hands, and Frank didn't understand it. But the guy, and when the man walked out, he said to me, you know something, lady? When I get to be his age, I want to be like him. And so I guess what I'm saying is take the chance if you can, if it's safe, if you feel safe with it, take the chance in the early stages, because as Carol started her conversation, everything changes. And what is constant in this disease is change. And before you know it, and you're just getting used to the person, the way they are, they'll change. And then you're on to something new. So while you can do the things that you feel safe doing, do them. I guess that's my big part of the early stages.
What a great example of what Carol was talking about, not being able to control every situation, needing that flexibility, and just being in the moment and looking at your surroundings and saying, well, what am I going to do here? I think there have been many a caregiver that have found themselves in the opposite gender bathroom. But really, what an example, Chris, of trying to be present in the moment. We're saying, you know what, we could take this trip now. And I also like that you pointed out that your neighbors were understanding when Frank would maybe not wear the right clothing outside, or your good friends were okay with him being quiet at a dinner party. You really noted areas where other people reached out to help you.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think something else that you said about thinking about the early stage of conversations or planning reminds me of something I was talking about with Chuck as we were preparing for the roundtable. And Chuck, I wonder if you might share your thoughts about how you looked for services and supports. And you had some wisdom around why that might be helpful at an earlier stage.
Right. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about that, Katie. I want to mention one other thing, and I think it supplements what Carol and Chris were both saying, and it really focuses to the very early stage, is about opening up to your family and friends about what's going on in your life. And, when you run into these situations, there's some kind of a cognitive issue going on, we're not sure what it is, and people have a tendency to be very private about that and not want to communicate what's going on. And VJ and I, very early on, we made a decision. I mean, initially when she couldn't find her car, and, I knew that there was something going on, didn't know what it was, but, we told our kids, VJ has an appointment with a neurologist, and, there's something going on, we don't know what it is. And as it took over a year to get a diagnosis, and so as we went through that process, we were pretty open. And I know in the support groups that I facilitate, we run into this issue of sometimes the person who's having the issues doesn't want to let people know that they're having a problem, and it can put a real burden on the caregiver, because you're like carrying this secret inside of you and saying, I need to ask for help from my family, or that kind of thing. So to me, that decision to be open about what's going on is a very important one in the early stages. And some of the members of our support groups who've gone through this issue and finally came to the decision to be open rather than trying to hide, or not share this. They say it's such a relief now when people see there's something strange going on, and they're not wondering what's going on, what's so-and-so, why is this person acting this way? And they're much more sympathetic when they know, certainly if you had a family member who had cancer, heart disease, or something, you know, you would let your family members and your close friends know about that, and they would offer their help and condolences and empathy. And, you know, when there's a cognitive issue, they will do the same thing if they know what's going on. So that's one, but
I love that, Chuck. That's wonderful. And I think that one other place where people can get support is to reach out to a therapist,
yes.
to get that mental health support for themselves, and to think about doing that earlier.
Right, right. But you asked Katie about finding resources and getting help, and
Yes.
That was something that BJ and I did, you know, early on. She started going to adult day programs. Initially she went to our local senior center because, you know, she could still function fairly independently. She wasn't able to do her job anymore. So she had been working as an accountant at a community college, and you know, she took a leave of absence and eventually got on extended disability from her job. But, you know, she couldn't just sit home alone all day, you know, watching television or reading books. So she started going to our local senior center, and, you know, they had exercise programs, they had social activities, and she had lunch there. She couldn't drive at that point. So I hired a home companion who would pick her up from the senior center after lunch and drive her home and spend the afternoon with her. And they would read together, read books. They love to do jigsaw puzzles. I have photographs of over 100 jigsaw puzzles that VJ and her home companion did. And doing that in the early stages, it helped VJ get used to, well, first it helped them have a bond. And we were very fortunate that we had the same home companion through the entire course of VJ's illness. So it was around early 2014 when we hired the first home companion. And she was with VJ even up until in late 2018 when VJ went into the long-term care facility, the skilled nursing facility. I asked the home companion to actually go in and meet with VJ, like she would be there in the morning when VJ woke up. So there was a friendly face, somebody that she knew. And so, and then once VJ got settled into the long-term care facility, you know, that home companion relationship ended. But having VJ get used to having somebody else besides me assisting her and taking care of her, and, you know, she started to develop incontinence issues as we went along, and being used to having somebody other than me helping her with that. And I think it's much harder if you wait until the later stages when somebody has progressed to the point. It's more difficult for them to get used to a different person assisting them. And so, you know, we use the adult day programs. She switched, you know, once the incontinence issues started to happen, that she was really no longer able to participate in the senior center program because those required, you know, independent functioning. But we switched her to an adult day program that had a dementia care, and she did that for many years, and she enjoyed it. You know, they had music programs that VJ loved. She sang in our church choir.
What I love about that, Chuck, is you talk about how VJ developed a new friendship, a new relationship after her symptoms had started. And I think that many families, when they think about hiring someone in their home or using an adult day health or memory care or skilled nursing program, they think, well, that person doesn't love my person. That staff person's not going to be able to care for them the way I could. And I think you've shared that BJ developed a real relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Carol, I think that you have had some experience with staff providing care that was genuine and loving and authentic.
I did. In the beginning, I had paired companions in my home. And when it was no longer safe after 2 years for my husband to stay home, we went to a specialized dementia facility. And then when that was no longer safe because he had medical issues, we transferred to a nursing home. And very early on, you know, I realized that my caregiving didn't end when he was in another location. And I considered it my solemn obligation to uplift every person who my husband came into contact with in these other facilities. So I wanted to bring as much light as I could into even the darkest places. And so that was my, I don't know what to call it, my mission. And if I couldn't do it, I wouldn't go. And I have to tell you, I didn't miss too many days over those years. And so I just wanted to uplift everybody and bring a smile to everyone's face. And I knew that that was going to improve his care. So I have to say that he had wonderful, wonderful care in every place. And the kindness, the tenderness with which these people treat their residents is so moving to me. And yeah, I've had very, very good experiences. So I think that that's possible for everyone.
And what an important message during the time of the pandemic, where families who have loved ones in facilities relying on those staff more than ever to provide that loving care. Chris, I think that you shared at the beginning that you even use hospice at home. And what we know is that for individuals living with progressive neurological disorders that cause dementia, they can sometimes use hospice at an earlier stage and for longer than I think public awareness makes clear. And so it's a service that we try to talk with folks about early. But if you could share, what was that experience like welcoming hospice into your home?
It was a really wonderful experience. I can't say enough good things about hospice. When I moved Frank, after 7 years, I moved Frank into an assisted living facility because he was way too mobile with no understanding for me to deal at home. And during those 2 years, his incontinence issues became incredible. And he was functioning on the level of almost a 2-year-old at the time. And so as things progressed I had always said, Katie knows, that when he's safe again, I would love to bring him home, but I didn't have any expectations or hopes of what that would look like. So as he progressed, just like you said, Carol, people in the facility started to love him and me and really care about us. And they were watching us. And finally, it sort of came around that, you know what, Frank could qualify. And it was really the people in the facility and the nurses and the aides that said, he ticks off so many of the qualifications. We don't know if these people with these brain diseases are going to die in a week or 2 months. You really don't know. And like with Frank, I have a picture of him at Christmas and he was dead in January. You'd never believe the Christmas picture. But anyway, they started saying, Chris, I think he's going to qualify for hospice. A lot of people are afraid of that. Are you? And I said, no, it's care and they're caring people. And I had seen them around, and because lots of people were qualifying. And so I said, no, let's give it a try. So he actually started on hospice while he was in the assisted living facility. And with their help, I was able to bring him home and have those same people, it was a team, come into my home. And the things that they provided for me were things that I would have had well, Katie would have helped me, but I mean, it would have been a lot of phone calls to Katie on what do I do about a bed? What do I do about the bathroom things that I need? What am I going to need for this? What am I going to, because he was losing his legs, he was losing all of that stuff. And Hospice knew exactly what to do. One morning he had rough spots on the bottoms of his heels that were starting to get raw. They said, we have booties, we'll bring them tomorrow. Booties go on, case solved. You know, they were a wonderful experience, but not only that, I had a man come, Frank was a big guy, and I had a man come, and I'm not, and I had a man come every morning. Well, I think they give you 3 to 4 mornings a week to shower him, as long as he could keep him in the shower, or to bathe him and to get him dressed every single day. They brought in a Broda chair that he was able to even go back and go to sleep in if we couldn't get him to bed. It was amazing the things they just know everything that you're going to need, and they know how to get it. And it's like that. And so hospice was never scary to me. Hospice was help personified. I mean, you do have to have qualifications that say you're headed to the end of your life.
Yes.
But that I knew anyway. I mean, I knew it for years. So they were my lifeline at home. They really were. They were just fabulous. And they fell in love with us and our home situation. And I kept in touch with some of them after Frank passed. And after a while, they said, in a very kind way, we have to let you go.
You know, you said it twice in your piece just now, Chris, talking about how when Frank lived in the memory care community, that they fell in love with him and with you. Yeah. And that you just said that the hospice program loved us. And I love hearing about that connection, and just really think about that dyad, that you are connected with your loved one and that you receive care too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think also in support groups, Chuck, you know, you run, is it 2 support groups that you run?
Yeah, there are 2 monthly groups, one for the Association for Frontotemporal Degeneration and one for the Alzheimer's Association Rhode Island chapter. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I think Carol and Chris and I, we had the experience of being in the same support group. Mm-hmm. Chuck, because you're in Rhode Island, we haven't been in a support group meeting together, but my observation in support group is that true, genuine friendships develop out of that experience. Do you see that in your support groups as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the Alzheimer's Association support group that I facilitate, VJ and I joined that group as members in 2014. And so, you know, we were active in that group, and the original members of that group became like family to us. And, you know, as VJ got to the later stages and it was no longer appropriate for her to, we attended as a couple. That's kind of a couple support group. So I attended with her, but it got to the point where the conversations were just too difficult and challenging. She would get emotionally upset. Mm-hmm. And so I tried for a while to have a friend come in and stay with her at home while I went to the support group on my own. You know, we couldn't maintain that. I got to the point I had to drop out for a while when she went into the skilled nursing facility in the fall of 2018. I went back and I started participating again in that support group. And, you know, it really, those people are like family to us. And the group changes over time because those original people that were in the group back in 2014, you know, I don't think any of them are still there. We have new members that have come in, and the group just has really bonded. And, you know, it's kind of the same thing with the AFTD support group.
Yeah, and I think that what's really been a blessing of pandemic is that it has pushed us as support group leaders to figure out these virtual ways, because I've heard from many caregivers that pandemic life is not so different from their life as a caregiver. They're restricted. They have to plan very carefully. It's hard for them to drive far or get away. So I think these virtual supports, in fact, I know at MGH, we've made a commitment to continue them regardless of what happens with the virus.
Even after the pandemic.
Yeah,
that's good. And one of the other things I guess I'd like to say about the support groups and, you know, why I'm still active now, we're approaching not quite 2 years since VJ passed away, but I stay active in it. It's kind of my way of honoring VJ's memory. And also I do it out of gratitude because we got so much help through the support groups, both emotional support and practical advice, about how to deal with incontinence issues, the products and the, putting, using a schedule for the bath, just all different kinds of practical advice that we got. And so I do it out of gratitude for the help that we got. And it's really the brave families that were willing to share their experiences that helped us.
Mm-hmm. I love that, Chuck. I love that. And, it makes me think about how, as Carol started us this morning, thinking about the unexpected and just having to flex to that. But I would love now to talk about what are the unexpected, maybe positive things that happened. Carol, can you think of an unexpected memory of joy or beauty that you might be able to share with us?
I once heard an expression that is so meaningful for me now, and it's that my burden has become my gift. Mm. And I feel that caregiving my husband on his journey was the hardest thing I've ever done. And there's so many gifts that flowed from it.
Yeah.
In terms of, this is going to sound meaningless, but treasuring the ordinary moments with someone, right? It's the joy of sort of wheeling him into the garden at the nursing home and sitting in the sunlight. Mm-hmm. And
together,
holding hands and just staring into each other's eyes. I mean, that was a joyful moment. Yeah. Right? And as hard as that whole journey was, and how relieved I am for him and for me that it ended. Mm-hmm. There's nothing I wouldn't give to walk into his room in the nursing home just one more time and see his face light up.
Yes.
Right? But that was daily joy. I mean, his gaze at me he was nonverbal for a couple of years. And I learned so much about love and how it deepens mm-hmm. in these journeys. So there's a lot of joy, I think, that, went with his path. And one of the things you reminded me of, Katie, because I don't remember them all, was early on when he was speaking, we were together. We were kind of lying on his bed in his assisted care, the Dementia specialized unit. And he turned to me and he said, "You're such a wonderful woman. Would you like to get married?" And I pointed to this huge wedding picture on the wall. So I said, "Well, we are married. That's our wedding picture." He goes, "You're kidding." I said, "What's that like to know?" He goes, "It's wonderful." I said, "Well, would you like to have a recommitment ceremony?" Long pause. I didn't think he was going to answer. And he goes, "I don't think that's necessary." So, those moments keep you going.
Carol, I love that. And I think that throughout Bruce's journey, you had so many stories of how maybe his words or his behaviors could not fully express the man that he was, but his heart continued to show through in so many ways.
Right. I mean, he continued to love us, my son and I, long after he remembered us.
Yeah.
Which
is so beautiful.
Yeah, it was very beautiful. So thank you for making me remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it. Oh, I love that. Chris, how about you? Do you have a memory of joy or beauty that you'd like to share with us today?
I actually have a lot of them because Frank really did turn into, I told Katie a while ago that I like to say to people that I may have known Frank for 45 years, but I didn't know him when he was 4 or 5, and now I do. And that's who he was at the end of his journey, except that there would be moments when he would lightly touch my face and I think, this guy knows who we are. This guy just knows it. And he'd look at me and then the moment would be gone, but it was worth everything, worth everything. And the one other thing I will say is, and I'm sure some of you out there are experiencing this because it's so common, but music was so important in continuing our relationship and in continuing his joy, that we sang all the time. And I always had my phone with me and put on music and sang. And he didn't get all the words all the times, but he smiled, smiled, smiled. But one song that he sang until several weeks before he died was My Girl. And people used to, by the Temptations, you know, I'd say, let's sing the song. And I'd put it on. And when he'd get to the part where he'd say, my girl, he'd sing it. And I'd go, oh, I've got it. I've got it.
He still wooed you, Chris. He was wooing you.
I love that. So yeah, there are smile memories for sure.
Thank you for sharing your journey and sharing your heart today with our community. That's wonderful. And Chuck, you and I had talked about some of your loving, warm memories with VJ. Is there something you'd like to share today?
Yeah, and again, I have a lot of them, but I know our time is short, and so I won't go on and on about it. But I would like to just go back to what Carol said about her, her statement, my burden is my gift. And, you know, again, one of the things that I see, like through the support groups, or, you know, the best way that we can help ourselves is by helping others. And, you know, VJ took that attitude through her whole experience. And Chris talked about her husband donating his brain to Mass General. And, you know, I have a story about that of, you know, VJ participated in a research study for 3 years at Mass General. And so part of that was, you know, considering the brain donation. And I had gotten the consent forms. I wanted her to donate her brain, but I was squeamish about asking her to sign the consent forms. And when I finally got up the gumption to present it, and this was fairly early stage, so she was still able to make a rational decision at this point. And, you know, and I talked to her about it, and I said, you know, I have the consent forms for the brain donation. And she said, oh yes, I'll sign it. This is so important for the future and for our kids. So that was kind of very similar to what Chris described there. But the joyful experience, and it was close to the end of VJ's journey. Her birthday was December 20th, and we had a grandson. Our first grandson was born on December 14th of 2018, right before she passed away. And so she was in Steerhouse in Providence at the skilled nursing facility there in the dementia unit. And so we had a birthday party for her on her birthday, and our son and daughter-in-law, all of our kids came, but they brought our grandson who was 6 days old. Aww. And we had like the library in the nursing facility there, and we had a cake, and you know, VJ got to hold our grandson who was 6 days old, and it was just such a beautiful, and everybody, all the staff, of course, you bring a baby in there, and you know, it's really regretful now under the circumstances that we can't do those kind of things. And you know, I really feel like the families that are going through this today have a lot more challenges than we had even a couple of years ago. So, but that was just, for VJ, that was such a joy to be able to hold her grandson, and right, and that was just on her birthday. He was 6 days old, and she passed away in like 2 months after that.
But Chuck, the story you just shared, what a beautiful circle of VJ voicing that she wanted to participate in research, to think about caring for your kids. What would the future be? How can we prevent this for tomorrow's families?
Right. And
then for you to end it with her holding the next generation in her arms. Senator Markey, as an Alzheimer's advocate, and he recently, I heard him speak, and he said that he hopes that the children of tomorrow will have to crack open a history book to ever find out what these Alzheimer's and related dementia diseases are. And that was such a powerful statement to me, to think about that children one day will grow up and not really know what these conditions are.
We can hope.
And I thank you all for your commitment to research. We are still able to conduct research today, despite the restrictions of the pandemic. And so if that is important to your family, you can reach out to me and the MGH-FTD unit. And I want to thank you all for your love and your lived experience and sharing your personal journeys and your hearts with our community. This was such a beautiful seminar, and I'm honored to have been a part of it with all of you.
Thank you, Katie. It's been a privilege.
Thank you all so much.
Stay safe and be well.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Katie.
Bye-bye.